Welcome to Module 1. This is going to cover the first 2 weeks of our course. There are 6 modules in the course, as you know. The first 2 weeks are going to be in Module 1. All of the other modules are 3 weeks long, except for the last module, which is also 2 weeks long. So to give you a brief overview of what we're going to cover in this module, I just want to let you know that this week we begin reading 3 articles, and next week we'll read another article, and we will watch a film, our first film. But before we get into watching films, we're going to talk a little bit about the approach, the methodology, the focus, and the genre that we're concerned with, which is Chicano cinema, Mexican-American film. So, just to give you a little bit of a brief introduction here, we're looking at film as fine art. It is a medium by which we can examine culture. We can learn about different ethnicities, different cultures, different worldviews, religious practices, belief systems, values. It's a way to give us insight into different areas of different cultures. But with that, it can be a little tricky in that often negative stereotypes are propagated through film pretty easily and quite often. So our focus in this class is to examine these films and come to understand where the stereotypes are, where the misrepresentation occurs, where the historical inaccuracies are, because they matter, and they often can have a negative impact, because whether we like it or not, film forms our understanding of the world to some degree. Film forms our understanding of other peoples and other cultures, whether we know it or not. So, in this class, we're going to look at Mexican-American films. We're also going to look at some literary art, and we also have a historical component to this class as well. So in order to contextualize the films we're going to look at, we're going to also study the history. All of the films we look at in this class have a historical setting centered around real historical events. Now that sometimes is well represented and accurate, and other times it's inaccurate. And that matters. Those kind of issues are what we're going to look at. So in week 1, you'll read 3 articles. You have an article by Rings, Maciel, and Acuna. Each of these 3 articles are going to address the study of cinema as a way of studying culture and understanding identity, otherness, kind of getting a grip around representation. Are Hispanics and Mexicans and Mexican Americans, are they represented accurately, or are they represented inaccurately or negatively in order to kind of promote a negative stereotype idea? And this happens with every culture, by the way. I mean, we can see this in every culture that exists, every race, every ethnicity. Our focus for this class, obviously, is going to be on how that occurs within the Mexican-American identity. So read those 3 articles. They're not long. They are pretty straightforward. They're mostly summarizing kind of the history of Latino and Chicano cinema and the films that have been produced. So read that. Some of the films we will watch are addressed in some of the articles, and they also talk about films we're not going to watch, but they also don't mention some films that we will watch. Discussion 1.1 is due by the end of week 1, and that is going to be your opportunity to introduce yourself, let the class and myself know who you are and kind of what your interests are and what your major is, And but you'll also get the opportunity in that discussion to discuss representation in film, and specifically in Chicano cinema, and to come to understand why it's important that individuals are properly represented, or cultures rather are properly represented in films. Because when you think about it, there's no accident in a film. Nothing is wasted effort. They very meticulously and deliberately produce films. It's a painstaking process. So it's not by accident that we end up with the result that we often see on the big screen. It was very intentional. So you have to wonder why sometimes producers and directors do things a little bit wrong on purpose. And so it's an interesting thing to ponder, I think. Which leads me to week 2, our study of prehistory to 1521, where we are going to specifically look at the film Apocalypto. Now, that is a film that was produced by Mel Gibson, also made Passion of the Christ. That was his second film, Apocalypto. It's really, we're kind of starting here for a couple of reasons. Primarily because in order for us to understand what it means to be Mexican American, we have to understand how the term Mexican even came about. And for us to even understand what Mexican, how that concept even came to be, that Mexico as a nation would even exist in the way it does today, we have to understand the pre-history behind it, dealing with the indigenous tribes and the Maya and the Aztec. We'll talk a little bit about the Toltec and culture. And so the reason we're going to watch Apocalypto, even though it focuses on the Maya, which are kind of pre-Aztec, the reason we focus on this film is because Gibson gets it wrong. He, for one, misrepresents the Maya terribly. He misrepresents their culture, paints them to be kind of violent. Some would say that he mixes the concept of the aggressive Aztec with the peaceful Maya and kind of makes the Maya look more aggressive than they really were in reality. He kind of blends together the kingdoms and when they would have existed to kind of create this one time period that somehow would have existed right before the arrival of the Spanish, because in the end of the film, the Spanish are arriving. So again, it's confusing because the Spanish arrive and they meet the Aztec, not the Maya. So he gets a lot of things wrong kind of historically, and the irony is he had scholars who were working with him to inform him of the historical timeline and the culture and the specifics, but he sort of didn't really care. So you kind of wonder why. Of course, he defends himself by saying he wasn't really attempting to make a historical film. He was trying to make a film about kind of this action-packed kind of Braveheart for the Maya, maybe. I think that he wanted to have an action-packed film, and he does. And I actually really enjoy this film because it has one of the most intense chase scenes that I've ever seen in any film. It'll blow your mind. It's really good. If you haven't seen it, you'll get to see that. So we're going to watch that, but we're also going to read an article that's heavily critical of Gibson's film by a scholar from SMU named David Friedel. And he pinpoints all of the historical inaccuracies, but he also speaks to why it's harmful to misrepresent the Maya. So I think that's important because it also kind of sets the stage for us as we continue to watch films, and we can kind of glean these ideas of why it's harmful, why you don't want to misrepresent people, and the damage that can do, and how people are remembered throughout history. So week 2 is our prehistory to 1521. The reason 1521 is kind of a mile marker here is because that was when Cortez ultimately overthrew Tenochtitlan. Sorry, I'm not very good at some of the indigenous names, but that's the city that ends up becoming Mexico City. But 1521 was when the tables were turned. They overthrew the Aztec completely. And then between 1521 and 1820, we have the Viceroyalty of New Spain. That, was when Mexico was literally owned by the Spanish. Which kind of sets us up for where we're going to be in the beginning of the next module, as we're going to watch a film about the conversion practices and the syncretism of introducing Goddess Mary, kind of goddess worship into the society, and kind of the success and failure that they faced. It's a really great film called La Otra Conquista, The Other Conquest, and I think you really enjoy that. But that kind of picks up in 1521 in our next span of years, period of time that we'll look at. So, you will have another discussion at the end of week 2, which is discussion 1.2, where you will speak to the issues that are addressed in the article by David Friedel, and talk about the historical inaccuracies and the misrepresentation that is existent in Apocalypto. And make sure you always post your initial thread and also reply to 2 of your classmates. Initial posts are always going to be due by Wednesday at midnight, and then your 2 follow-up posts to your classmates will be due by Sunday night of the week. So the end of week 2 ends the entire module, which also means you have some deliverables, is what we will call them. Discussions aren't really deliverables. They're discussions. It's conversation. Deliverable means you're going to turn something in. You're going to submit something. And at the end of each module, you'll see a folder that says deliverables, and when everything in that folder is due, you'll have a unit 1, or module 1 rather, quiz that is due. And it's going to be based on the readings and the films. Very straightforward. And we'll have quizzes every module except when we have exams. So when we have exams, I don't see the point in making you take a quiz and an exam. We have 2 exams. One at midterm, and that will cover everything in the class up to the middle. And then the final will cover everything from the second half of the class. So we only have module quizzes in the end of module 1, the end of module 2, not 3 because that's our midterm, and then the end of module 4 and 5, and then we have our final at the end of module 6. Okay, so on top of quizzes at the end of the modules, you'll also find some other assignments. This module, so the end of week 2 for module 1, you will submit your first summary analysis. Summary analysis is a 1-page write-up that has 2 paragraphs. 1 paragraph of summary, a 2nd paragraph of analysis. Now, I've given you very specific guidelines to follow in your syllabus, and I will also post them on Blackboard every time you're supposed to turn one in. I'll put those files there so you won't be confused about the formatting. And so at the end of this module, you can choose from the article Identity and Otherness in Contemporary Chicano Cinema by Guido Rings, or you can choose Chicago Cinema, A Panoramic View by Maciel, or the Friedel article Betraying the Maya. So throughout this course, depending on what we're covering, You'll always, at the end of the module, have a summary analysis due, but we also have 4 film analysis that we'll do in this class, and you will also write a book review or analysis response to The House on Mango Street. Okay, so I don't want to inundate you with too much information for your first module. So this module covers the first 2 weeks of the class, which is our introduction to the cinema aspect of humanities and fine arts and studying culture, specifically Chicano cinema. And then in week 2, we're going to start looking at film. We're going to watch Apocalypto, and you're going to read the article critiquing Gibson's film. And at the end of the module, you have a quiz, and you'll turn in your first 1-page summary analysis on your choice of the 3 articles it lists. Okay, well, do good work. I'm excited to have you in the class, and so I'll end the video here, and then I'll see you in the same format in the next module introduction video. Thank you.